the morning of December 7th, 1941, Americans would awake to the news of an unprecedented attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, located on the Hawaiian island of Honolulu. The men and women who were stationed there awoke to the sounds of explosions and gunfire, sounds that would echo throughout the remainder of their lives. The attack would leave 2,335 dead and 1,143 wounded, the largest attack on a U.S. territory prior to September 11th, 2001. At the time of the attack, the U.S. Pacific Fleet that was stationed in the shallow harbor consisted of 8 battleships, 8 cruisers, 30 destroyers, 4 submarines, and 47 other types of ships. There were also 390 aircraft, which were clustered close together as a preventative measure against potential sabotage. One vital battleship that was present during the attack was the USS West Virginia. The USS West Virginia had its own story to tell, and despite taking the brunt of the Japanese attack, she would go on to fight another day. The USS West Virginia was first commissioned for service in 1923 and was the last battleship in the United States Navy to be designed under the standard-style Colorado class of battleships, which would come to find itself outdated by the time of World War II. The battleship was built in Newport News, Virginia in 1920, fitted with an all-or-nothing armor, which used reinforced armor around critical areas of the ship while leaving less vital sections more vulnerable. The USS West Virginia, or WEAVY as it would be commonly called, had a maximum speed of 21 knots and was fully equipped with 8 6-inch guns with a secondary battery of 14 5-inch guns, while also armored with 3-inch anti-aircraft guns throughout. The 624-foot ship, with a carrying capacity of over 1,400, was shipped off to Hawaii in April of 1940, becoming a significant part of the U.S. Pacific Navy Fleet. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the USS West Virginia was moored next to the USS Tennessee along Battleship Row, with its port side exposed, leaving it vulnerable to torpedo attack. Shortly before 8 a.m., the first wave of Japanese bombers began their bombardment of the harbor, and within minutes the Admiral Husband E. Kimmel sent out the first dispatch that read, "Air raid on Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill." But he was already too late, for any help was too far out. Admiral Kimmel had ignored previous warnings as recently as November 27th, when he was warned that an attack from the Japanese was imminent. U.S. intelligence had intercepted and decoded multiple messages sent from the Japanese in the weeks leading up to the attack, such as when on November 26th, the Japanese sent a message calling for increased medical facilities for expected casualties in the near future. John Mueller, in analyzing U.S. intelligence practices and intercepts surrounding the attack, argues that the U.S. intelligence believed that torpedoes would be largely ineffective in the shallow harbor. As the attack began, some of the military men present, such as Pharmacist Mate 2nd Class Lee Sosi, believed the initial sounds of the attack were coming from naval exercises that were quite common around the base. The USS West Virginia sustained 7 torpedo hits, with one being a dud, and also suffered 2 strikes from armor-piercing bombs. Over the course of their lives, the survivors of the attack would recount the event from their perspective, and tales of bravery, selflessness, and love of country would become ingrained in the history of American military as well as the rest of society. One such figure was U.S. Navy messman Doris Miller, who was stationed on the battleship USS West Virginia on the morning of the attack. Miller's actions during the attack would go on to earn him the Navy Cross, the 3rd highest honor in the United States Navy. Doris Miller was born and raised outside Waco, Texas in 1919 and joined the Navy in 1939 as a result of his family's economic hardship stemming from the Great Depression. Miller was an imposing figure, weighing in at 235 pounds, and during his time in the Navy won their heavyweight boxing title. During this time, the Navy was still segregated, with African Americans being regulated to mess duties and prohibited from combat positions, while making up less than 1% of enlisted men. In 1940, Miller was transferred to the USS West Virginia, and on the morning of December 7, 1941, he found himself right in the middle of a fight he never could have imagined. On the morning of the attack, Miller had risen early to collect laundry and look forward to having the rest of the day off. when at 7:57 a.m. his ship was hit by the first torpedo, an 18-inch aerial torpedo that destroyed the ship's steering gear and rudder. At least one torpedo exploded within the ship, and the nearby USS Arizona's explosion contributed to a raging inferno aboard the West Virginia, along with flooding resulting from the holes created by the torpedoes. Lieutenant White would describe the event in his after-action report. The captain did not want to be moved, but he was carefully carried to shelter abaft the conning tower. Under direction of Lieutenant Ricketts, material to construct a stretcher to which to lower the captain was procured, while Doris Miller and Matt, second class, and I manned number 1 and number 2 machine gun forward of the conning tower. To this day, controversy remains over the number of aircrafts down by Miller's shooting, but witnesses testified to his courage in the heat of battle despite no formal combat experience. The senior surviving officer of the USS West Virginia described the heroics of these men in his after-action report, stating, Lieutenant White, who was aided by Doris Miller, mess attendant second class U.S. Navy, was instrumental in hauling people along through oil and water to the quarterdeck, thereby unquestionably saving the lives of a number of people who might have otherwise been lost. After the battle, news began to spread of the heroics of Doris Miller, and thanks to the efforts of groups such as the NAACP and the persistence of the Pittsburgh Courier, who identified Miller and helped ensure that Americans learned of his bravery, Miller was awarded the Navy Cross. Miller was the first African American to receive the Navy Cross, awarded for valor, and the award is the second highest decoration awarded in the United States Navy. In the following days, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, who was a force behind the continuation of segregation throughout the Navy, called for an investigation into how the Japanese were able to pull off such an unprecedented attack against the United States. The USS West Virginia would undergo extensive repairs, but was back in action by July 1944. The Weavy would go on to participate in the Battle of Leyte in the Philippines, sinking 2 battleships and 1 heavy cruiser, while also being the only ship from Pearl Harbor to be present at the Japanese surrender on September 2, 1945. She was finally decommissioned on January 2, 1947. Doris Miller's story in World War II would also continue, but tragically he would perish on November 24, 1943, while fighting in the Battle of Macon in the Pacific. Miller's heroics on the morning of December 7, 1941, cemented his legacy in American military history, and he will forever be linked with the USS West Virginia and the countless others who fought toe-to-toe against an overwhelming force that fateful morning.